There are rains that never end. Imagine this. You're standing in the painted desert of Arizona. The wind scrapes across ancient red stone, dry and sharp as breath from an old, forgotten world. But if you dig down, past the rusted sand through layers of time, you'll find a scar, a thin band of black shale. Beneath it lies a secret. Once this desert was an ocean of rain, a drowning world where the sky wept for 2 million years without rest. Forests turned to swamps, rivers carved through continents, and the creatures that ruled the earth vanished beneath the flood. Each drop that fell carried a warning that when the planet changes, no empire, no species, no life is ever truly safe. Tonight, we return to that forgotten storm, to the 2 million-year rain, to hear the earth remember itself. And if you'd like to keep traveling through these ancient worlds with me, stay close, subscribe, and let's keep listening to the planet's old stories together. Before the first drops began to fall, before the clouds grew heavy and the skies turned black for 2 million years, the earth was dry. So dry that even the wind seemed to whisper like sand through bone. It was a time before oceans divided the continents, before mountains rose to catch the rain. The land was whole, one vast body of stone and dust, a single supercontinent we now call Pangaea. Imagine it stretching from pole to pole, a continent so immense that the sea was nothing but a rumor on the horizon. The air hung thick with carbon dioxide and the breath of volcanoes. No polar ice, no cool seasons, just heat, unbroken, relentless, a furnace beneath an orange sun. Rains came only once a year in violent pulses called mega monsoons. They filled the rivers for a moment, then vanished again, leaving behind cracked earth, the bones of fish, and the ghosts of green. For millions of years, this balance held. The earth slept beneath its red sky, wrapped in silence, its heart beating slowly under the weight of dust and time. And yet, life found a way. Seed ferns, strange ancestors of the plants we know, spread their roots deep into arid soil. Cycads, thick-leaved and waxen, stood like small soldiers against the drought. Wherever water lingered, ancient conifers rose like pillars, their needles coated in resin to trap what little moisture remained. Among them moved the old masters of the land, creatures half forgotten, half familiar. The Dicynodonts, broad-bodied, tusked herbivores with beaked mouths built to shred the toughest stems. The Rhynchosaurs, low to the ground, teeth fused into bone, digging for roots beneath the crust. And stalking them all, the mighty Postosuchus, a reptile that walked like a crocodile but could rise on 2 legs, a predator carved from fire and hunger. They ruled a world without mercy, a world that had not yet known the sound of steady rain. But deep beneath their feet, the planet was stirring. The crust began to split in the far west of Pangaea, in what would one day drift north to become Alaska and western Canada. From those fissures rose lava, slow at first, then endless, flooding the land in waves of molten basalt. The Wrangellia eruptions had begun, and with them, the first breath of change. Each eruption exhaled billions of tons of carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide into the sky, invisible at first, but deadly. The air grew thicker, the oceans warmer, and from their steaming surface rose clouds. At last, the heat began to feed itself, a cycle of evaporation, condensation, and fever. The planet was making its own storm. In that moment between silence and flood, the earth paused, as if holding its breath. The ground cracked like old pottery. The air shimmered with light and metal. The animals moved restlessly, their instincts screaming of something unseen. They didn't know it, but their world was ending, not in fire, but in water. And here, as a historian, I cannot help but listen to what this ancient silence is trying to tell us. Pangaea was more than a continent. It was a warning. A lesson written in stone about the fragility of balance. For millions of years, the Earth endured. Then, in a geological instant, everything changed. A rise in temperature by only a few degrees was enough to unravel an entire biosphere. The mightiest creatures vanished. The forests drowned. The air thickened until even survival became an act of grace. And yet in that collapse, new life was waiting. Small, fast, adaptable, the first true dinosaurs. The heirs of catastrophe. The planet was rewriting its story, one raindrop at a time. When I close my eyes and imagine that ancient land, the red deserts, the sleeping volcanoes, the scent of ash before the storm, I feel the same quiet tension that lingers in our own age. We too live in a balance that feels eternal, and yet we know deep down that no balance lasts forever. The rains are coming, they always do. And so the story continues. From the cracked silence of Pangaea to the sound of thunder that will soon open the skies, the world is about to change. Again. The silence of Pangaea did not end with wind or thunder. It ended with a tremor, a pulse deep beneath the crust, like the slow heartbeat of something ancient remembering its strength. Far to the west, where today the coasts of Alaska and British Columbia meet the Pacific, the land began to tear. Not in one place, but in many. Cracks opening across the stone like lightning frozen in rock. From those wounds, fire was born. Lava surged upward in rivers, pouring across the land in sheets that glowed the color of blood and sunset. Each eruption blotted out the stars, darkening the sky with smoke and sulfur. And when the fire cooled, it left behind black plains that stretched to the horizon, the first scars of what geologists now call the Wrangellia Large Igneous Province. For hundreds of thousands of years the earth bled. Not quickly, not explosively, but continuously. A slow fever that would last longer than all of human history. If you could have stood there, you would have seen a horizon trembling in heat, the air thick with the hiss of gas and ash. The ground glowed, the rivers boiled. And yet beyond the fire, life continued, blind to the scale of what was coming. To the creatures of that age, it must have felt like a long summer, a little warmer, a little darker. But the chemistry of the world was shifting in ways no eye could see. Every eruption released immense volumes of gas, billions of tons of carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide, rising into the upper atmosphere like invisible smoke. The Earth had exhaled before, but never like this. Carbon dioxide trapped heat, thickening the planet's blanket. Sulfur dioxide reflected sunlight away, cooling the air for a time, but when the dust settled, the heat always returned, stronger, heavier, imprisoned within the greenhouse sky. It was a delicate dance between fire and air, and the rhythm began to spiral. As temperatures climbed, the oceans grew restless. Warm water evaporates faster than cold, and so the seas began to breathe, vast clouds rising from their surface, drifting eastward over the red continent. For the first time in millions of years, Pangaea tasted the scent of real rain. But this was not the kind of rain that brings life. This was the beginning of a deluge that would reshape the planet. In modern science, we can trace that ancient breath. Every layer of rock tells its side of the story. Carbon isotopes record the sudden surge of volcanic gas. Mercury, released by eruptions, settled into the soil, its fingerprints still visible today in stones buried beneath our feet. Even the ratio of oxygen inside fossilized shells reveals the same truth. The seas were heating, the air was thickening, and something immense was unfolding. The Earth had entered a feedback loop, one that no force could break. The fires of Wrangellia fed the skies fed the oceans, and the oceans in turn fed the clouds that would soon fall as endless rain. In that cycle, we see the oldest story the planet knows. The way one element touches another, the way one act of creation becomes the seed of destruction. The fire did not kill the world, it prepared it. As a historian, I see in this moment something profoundly human. A pattern of ignorance and awakening. The great beasts of Pangaea walked across smoking plains, unaware that their skies had already changed. They ate, hunted, and nested under the haze of sulfur sunsets, never knowing that their children would never see the same stars. It reminds me of us, the way we live within our own age of warmth, feeling the tremors beneath our feet, hearing the whisper of storms yet to come, but still believing we have time. Wrangellia was not a single event. It was a conversation between the earth and itself. A slow exchange between rock and air, between magma and ocean. And as that dialogue unfolded, something remarkable happened. The planet began to reimagine itself. The great deserts of Pangaea would soon give way to floods and forests. The sky, once dry as glass, would turn heavy with vapor, and from that endless rain, new ecosystems would be born, while others drowned forever. In the grand clock of the planet, Wrangellia was the spark that turned the hour. The fire beneath the crust set in motion the water above it. The heat that burned the land summoned the clouds that would darken the heavens. It is one of the oldest lessons carved into stone. The end of one world is always the beginning of another. And so the rain began to gather, quiet at first, a mist, a drizzle, a trembling on the horizon. Soon it would fall without end. But before the first storm broke, the earth took one last breath of fire. A deep exhale of magma and smoke, a warning written in flame. And that is where our story turns next, to the first rain and the moment when the deserts of Pangaea became oceans of thunder. The story of Rangelia's fire does not end in ash. It rises into the air, into the invisible breath of the world. Because every eruption, every plume of smoke, carried something more powerful than flame. It carried carbon. Not the quiet carbon of soil and bone, but the wild, restless carbon of magma. Gas that escaped from the mantle, molecules of carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide racing upward into the sky. They gathered there, and for the first time in millions of years, the Earth's atmosphere began to change its very nature. The sky became a mirror. Sunlight, once free to enter and leave, was now caught in a trap of its own making. It passed easily through this new veil of gas, striking the ground, warming rock and sea. But when that warmth tried to rise back into space, the carbon molecules caught it, absorbed it, scattered it, and sent it downward again. Light entered as a visitor, but heat became a prisoner. This is the greenhouse effect, a gentle term for a violent truth. It is natural, necessary even. Without it, the earth would be a frozen desert. But when the balance tilts, when the sky grows thick and the air grows greedy, the warmth becomes fever, and the planet begins to sweat. Over centuries that felt like moments in geologic time, the oceans heated. Warm water evaporated faster, and with every breath of vapor, another layer of insulation wrapped around the world. Water vapor, itself a greenhouse gas, amplified the heat that made it. A loop began. More warmth, more evaporation, more warmth again. It was a runaway conversation between the sea and the sky, each echo feeding the other, each breath heavier than the last. Clouds thickened. Storms grew wild. And somewhere over the red deserts of Pangaea, a single drop of rain fell, the first of billions that would follow. In laboratories today, we can still hear that echo. Geochemists study it in the carbon of ancient shells, in the isotopic signatures etched into stone. When magma released its carbon, it left behind a fingerprint, a subtle shift in the ratio of carbon-12 to carbon-13. Across the world, those fingerprints appear in rocks from the same narrow band of time. A sharp, sudden plunge, the signal of massive volcanic outgassing. Even the oceans remember. The shells of marine life from that age carry oxygen isotopes that whisper the same story. The sea surface grew warmer, fresh water poured in from the land, and salinity dropped. Rain was falling, not for days, but for millennia. To imagine the earth then is to see a world trembling between two states, too hot to rest, too wet to burn. The deserts of Pangaea turned to clay, its red sands washed into rivers, its air thick with haze. The sky had become both furnace and womb. It was killing and creating at once. For every species that perished under that endless storm, another waited for its chance. The dinosaurs, small and unremarkable, had already survived one crisis by staying adaptable. In the world to come, that skill would make them kings. As a historian of the Earth, I see something almost tragic in this design. The same physics that warms a morning field can also flood a continent. The same carbon that fuels growth can, in excess, smother it. Nature doesn't choose sides, it simply reacts. And the most dangerous thing is not the fire that burns, but the warmth that doesn't stop. The Rangelia eruptions had set this chain in motion. Fire had turned to gas, gas to vapor, vapor to rain. And now, the world was beginning to drown in its own breath. If you stand beneath the night sky today and feel the air growing heavier year by year, you are feeling a whisper of that ancient storm. The same chemistry, the same delicate balance, still governs the warmth of our modern world. We are not outside the story. We are part of its next chapter. The greenhouse that once remade the Triassic world has never really left. It only sleeps between epochs, waiting for another civilization to stir the sky again. And so the fire became air, the air became rain, and the rain became the memory of a planet reborn. In the next chapter, that rain will fall without end. And the world, once dry and still, will awaken as a flood. It began softly, a shimmer on the horizon, a haze like smoke that was not smoke rising from the hot skin of the earth. For ages, the land had known only silence, the stillness of heat, the rasp of dust over stone. But now, something new stirred in the air. Moisture, fragile, trembling, a promise hanging between the clouds and the ground. The first drops fell like whispers. They hissed as they touched the sand, vanishing in seconds, leaving only dark spots that faded as quickly as they came. And yet the sky did not stop. It was as if the heavens had broken their silence and could not remember how to be quiet again. At first, the creatures of Pangaea watched the rain with wonder. The Dicynodonts lifted their heads, feeling coolness against their cracked skin. Ferns unfurled in delight. Rivers came to life, gathering from canyons long dry, rushing across plains that had forgotten the sound of water. But the clouds kept building, day after day, year after year. Soon, the rivers could not contain what fell from above. They tore at the land, ripping away soil, carving new valleys, carrying with them everything that could be moved: stone, ash, the bones of beasts. The rain did not fall as storms do now. It was not a season, it was a state of being. Across the continent, the dry rhythm of Pangaea changed forever. The atmosphere, swollen with vapor, released its burden without mercy. The sun vanished behind curtains of gray, and thunder became the new heartbeat of the world. Imagine that world now. A horizon veiled in mist, mountains fading into pale shadows, the air thick and sweet with the scent of wet stone. Forests grew like fever, ferns and conifers stretching toward the dim light. The ground turned soft, swamps spread for miles. Where deserts once glowed red, now lakes reflected the gray sky. Coal began to form, layers of dead leaves and drowned trunks compressed under centuries of rain. Black shale, rich with the ghosts of waterlogged plants, replaced the red sandstone of the past. The very color of the earth changed. Geologists today call this transformation the Carnian pluvial episode, a time when the world forgot how to be dry. But for those who lived it, it was simply the end of the familiar. The rain brought life, but it also brought endings. The old species, masters of drought and dust, began to vanish. Their roots rotted, their eggs drowned, their bones washed into the rivers and were buried beneath new mud. Only the adaptable survived, creatures that could breathe in the wet air, that could feed on what the flood left behind. Among them were the early dinosaurs, small and quick, creatures of twilight who could hunt between the rains. In the shadow of thunder, their age began. As a historian, I often wonder what it felt like to live through the first rain and realize it would never end. Perhaps it began as relief, then confusion, then fear. There must have been a moment when even the mountains seemed smaller, their peaks shrouded in the gray of unbroken sky. 2 million years of rain, a number so vast it defies imagination. But on the scale of the earth, it was the blink of an eye, a heartbeat long enough to reset everything. The rivers deepened, the oceans swelled, the land drowned, and the world was rewritten in water. Every time I watch rain fall on modern soil, I think of that first storm, how it changed not only the shape of continents, but the direction of life itself. Rain is gentle now, but it remembers. Each drop carries the memory of that age, of thunder that never ceased, of forests born from flood, of an earth that washed itself clean to begin again. The rain began as a whisper, then it became a hymn, and soon it would become the flood that crowned the dinosaurs. The rain did not stop, days blurred into centuries. Centuries became millions of years, and the world, that red, sunburnt continent, was swallowed whole by water. The Pangaean deserts, once shimmering with heat, sank beneath rivers that never ceased to rise. The air grew heavy with mist, the sky turned the color of iron, and the horizon vanished into haze. Forests drowned. Mountains eroded. The very shape of the land began to melt away. And beneath the flood, the record of the earth changed forever. In the dry ages, rock had formed in layers of red sandstone, coarse, grainy, born of dust and wind. But now, something new began to settle. Mud, clay, shale. Tiny grains washed from a million hills drifted into still water and blanketed the world in darkness. Within that darkness, life decomposed and became memory. Plants once tall as towers fell into the flood, their leaves pressed together into sheets of coal. In lakes and swamps, whole forests were entombed. Every branch, every seed was sealed beneath layers of black silt, nature's own archive written in mud. Geologists call these layers transitional beds, the turning point where arid stone ends and waterlogged rock begins. And inside those layers, the fossils tell the story better than any myth. The seed ferns that once ruled the dry world disappeared first. Their roots, made for sand and sun, could not breathe in flooded soil. Their pollen vanishes from the record like a language forgotten. In their place came ferns, true ferns, lovers of shade and water, their spores carried on the damp wind. And above them rose conifers, their deep roots gripping soft, oxygen-poor ground. The shift was so complete that the very dust of the earth changed color. The red faded, the black began. And the animals, they left their ghosts, too. In the wet layers of the Carnian age, the bones of dryland creatures grow rare. The mighty Dicynodonts, gone. The armored Etosaurus, gone. Their bones appear, then stop, like a story cut short mid-sentence. But then, in younger stone, a new handwriting appears. Delicate footprints, hollow bones, claws curved for motion. Dinosaurs. Small, quick, adaptable. They walked lightly over the mud, feeding where others had drowned. Each print they left is a pulse of life emerging from catastrophe. The age of giants had ended. The age of survivors had begun. If you could stand there on the shore of that Triassic flood, you would not see extinction. You would see transformation. The rain had become a sculptor. Every drop chiseled the world anew. The seas grew fresher. The skies grew fertile. The land, though half drowned, began to bloom again. Coal seams today, those black veins running beneath our cities, are the remains of that drowned world. They are the breath of that rain, trapped forever in stone. When we burn them, we awaken the ghosts of that age. The same carbon, the same warmth, the same story beginning again. The earth, even in destruction, creates. That is its oldest instinct. Every flood births a new shoreline, every extinction, a new idea of life. The fossils of that time are not a record of death, but of evolution, life adapting to a planet reborn in water. So as the rain sculpted the continents, it also sculpted destiny. The bones of the old world sank. The bones of the new world rose. And beneath every mountain today lies a page of that drowned history, pressed between time and silence. The earth remembers everything. It simply takes a little patience to read it. And now, I ask you, if the earth once drowned and began again, what would survive if it happened now? What trace of us would the fossils remember? Tell me, what do you think would remain? The rain had become eternal. The flood was no longer a visitor. It was the new order. And in that gray twilight between ages, the old world began to die. The deserts of Pangaea, once red and vast, now lay buried beneath silt and shadow. The air that had once shimmered with heat grew heavy and wet. Every river sang the same dirge, a song of endings. The ancient ecosystem that had ruled the Triassic for millions of years, the kingdom of dust and sun, was drowning. The Dicynodonts, the once great grazers of the dry earth, fell first. Their bodies, made for endurance, not for adaptation, could not bear the weight of the new world. They were creatures of thirst, built for scarcity, for the struggle against drought. But now the land was thick with water, and every breath brought the scent of rot. They wandered in herds through marshland, searching for dry ground that no longer existed. One by one they sank. Not just into mud, but into memory. The rhynchosaurs, with their fused jaws and shoveling snouts, followed them. They were diggers of roots, engineers of the soil. But the roots were gone, drowned or decayed beneath the rising flood. Their strong jaws broke upon emptiness. Their fossils vanish in silence, as if the earth herself exhaled and let them go. Predators starved. The Postosuchus, the shadow king of the old plains, stood alone above the flood. It hunted ghosts. The great herds that had fed it were gone, and with them, the rhythm of pursuit that had defined its reign. For millions of years, the world had been theirs, a balance of hunter and prey, dust and drought, sun and survival. Now that balance shattered. The air itself had turned against them, and with it, an empire ended. But death on a planetary scale is not like death for us. It is not sudden. It is slow, vast, patient. It seeps through the cracks of time, whispering in each generation until silence becomes the only song left to sing. Fossils from this moment, the middle layers of the Carnian episode, tell a story written in absence. Species disappear, not all at once, but like lights going out across a map. Every ecosystem, from swamp to upland, reshaped itself. The world was not ending. It was forgetting. And in that forgetting, something else was born. When the seed ferns vanished, the conifers took root. Their needles, waxed against water, thrived in the soaked soil. Where once the land was scrub and thorn, now rose forests thick and green, the first Jurassic landscapes, and among their roots, small reptiles and amphibians found refuge in the shadows. Tiny creatures, overlooked in the age of giants, were learning how to live in a changing world. It is one of nature's quiet ironies. The end of stability is always the beginning of possibility. Still, for the old species, the flood was not renewal, it was extinction. For tens of millions of years, life had been sculpted by dryness. Everything that breathed had learned to survive without mercy. Now, all those lessons were useless. Evolution had no pity, it remembered only what worked. And what worked now was flexibility, not power. Speed, not size. Adaptation, not endurance. The slow fell. The specialized perished. The small endured. The Triassic apocalypse was not an explosion of death, but a slow drowning, a suffocation of the unfit. To imagine it is to walk through a forest that never stops raining. The ground soft beneath your feet, steam rising from every leaf, the air thick enough to taste. You would hear the low moan of wind through drowned trees, see the corpses of old beasts half buried in black mud. The earth was shedding its skin, and beneath that decay, something new was stirring. A heartbeat in the wet soil, a new rhythm of life waiting to emerge. The end of one age is always the seed of another. When paleontologists study these layers today, they find more than bones, they find transitions. The chemistry of the rock shifts, the color changes from red to black, then to gray and green. It's as if the planet itself was painting a record of its grief. Even the ocean tells the same story. Sediments show a flood of fresh water pouring in from land, suffocating reefs, changing salinity, driving marine species to extinction. The death of the dry world was not confined to land. It reached the sea and beyond it. As a historian of the planet, I cannot help but see reflection here, a mirror turned toward our own age. We too live in a moment of tipping balance. We too walk on the edge of change. In the death of Pangaea's old ecosystems, the Earth proved one truth above all others. It always continues, but never in the same way twice. For the planet, extinction is not tragedy, it is transformation. But for those who live through it, it feels like loss beyond measure. And perhaps that is what the fossils still whisper to us, that every ending once had eyes that saw it coming and could do nothing to stop it. When the rain finally began to fade, it left behind a world that did not recognize itself. The old beasts were gone, the old forests buried, and the survivors stood blinking in the new light, among rivers that had carved continents into pieces. The age of water had washed away the age of dust, and in that silence after the storm, the earth drew its first breath as something new. But now let me ask you this. If our world began to shift the same way, if oceans rose and forests fell, would we adapt, or would we drown with the old gods of the dry world? What do you believe humanity would become after the storm? The storm did not end in a single day. It faded, slowly, reluctantly, as if the sky itself was learning how to breathe again. The rivers still roared, the swamps still shimmered with mist, but the endless downpour had weakened. And when the clouds finally began to lift, the world that emerged beneath them was unrecognizable. The kings of the dry age were gone. Their bones lay buried in layers of black shale, their names erased from the wind. The empire of drought, the age of sun, sand, and tusk, was over. What remained were fragments, echoes of strength now broken by the weight of water. Among the first to fall were the Dicynodonts, those barrel-bodied herbivores with beaks like iron and tusks like ivory spears. For 50 million years, they had thrived. They were engineers of the plains, their herds reshaping rivers, their feeding shaping forests. But evolution, that patient sculptor, has no loyalty. Their world of heat and dust had vanished, and so did they. Fossil beds from the Carnian age show their end in exquisite silence. A sudden drop in their bones, a fading of tracks. As if, one by one, they walked into the water and never came back. The rhynchosaurs, those root diggers with jaws fused to their skulls, fell next. They had survived every drought, every shift of wind, but not this. Their food, the dry shrubs and ferns of the old world, had vanished beneath the flood. Their teeth, made for scraping sand, were useless in mud. The last of them left behind only faint impressions, their story ending mid-sentence in stone. The Rauisuchians, the great predators of the Triassic plains, were left to rule an empty kingdom. Their prey was gone, and the swamp was not their home. Heavy, slow, built for pursuit across open land, they sank into the mire they once commanded. In a few million years, their lineage too would vanish. Another chapter closed. But extinction is rarely a clean act. It is not a single blow, but a slow unraveling, a loss of food, of place, of meaning. As the old species fell, the very structure of ecosystems collapsed. The hunters starved, the scavengers starved after them. Even the insects, those eternal survivors, suffered as their forests drowned. It was as if the earth had pressed the reset button on life itself. And yet, while the giants fell, something smaller stirred. Across the damp forests of the New World, creatures that had once been mere shadows began to thrive. Tiny reptiles scurried among the ferns, feeding on what the storm had spared. Amphibians, creatures of both water and air, found themselves perfectly at home. And among them, the first true dinosaurs, nimble, light-boned, hungry for chance, emerged from obscurity. They were not rulers yet. They were opportunists, filling the gaps left by extinction. But nature loves an opportunist, and the gaps were many. To walk the earth in that time was to see evolution in motion. A planet reassigning its actors, rebuilding its balance from the ruins of what had been. Fossil records show a dramatic turnover. Entire families vanish, while new ones rise almost instantly. What had taken millions of years before now happened in a geological heartbeat. In that chaos, the rules of life rewrote themselves. Where once endurance had been the key, now adaptability ruled. Where once the largest survived, now it was the smallest who thrived. Power had shifted, quietly, decisively. To a historian of the earth, this moment feels eerily familiar. Every civilization, every kingdom, reaches a point where its strengths become its weaknesses. The traits that once guaranteed survival become the very reasons for decline. So it was for the lords of the Triassic. They were too well adapted to what was and could not bend to what had become. And like every empire that grows proud, they fell not from weakness, but from refusal to change. The rain, in the end, did not kill them. They were undone by memory, by the inability to forget what the world once was. Nature does not mourn. It moves forward. The fossils we find are not gravestones, but lessons. Each one a note in the long song of renewal. When the skies finally cleared and the sun broke through the mist, it shone upon a world both newborn and ancient. The air smelled of pine and resin. The ground steamed with warmth, and where the giants had fallen, new life walked, curious, cautious, and ready. The age of dominance had ended. The age of adaptation had begun. And as we look back through time, we must ask, what happens when our own systems, the ones we've built with such precision, reach their breaking point? When the climate shifts, when the air thickens, when the familiar becomes hostile, will we adapt like the survivors, or vanish like the giants? Tell me, if the Earth rewrote the rules once, could it do so again, and would we still have a place in the story? The rain had taken everything, and yet, from what it left behind, life began again. It always does. When the floodwaters finally pulled back, they left behind a world washed clean, soft, green, fertile, and waiting. The land still smelled of smoke and rot, but beneath the decay, new roots were pushing through the mud. The age of dust and tusk had ended. Now came the age of light bones and quick hearts. In the silence after the storm, tiny footsteps began to trace new paths across the soft earth. Small reptiles, delicate and swift, darted between the ferns. They were descendants of survivors, creatures that had once hidden in burrows or hunted by moonlight while the giants thundered above. Now, they were the rulers of a world without rulers. Among them walked the first true dinosaurs, not the titans of later ages, but modest creatures, 1 or 2 meters long, standing lightly on their hind legs, their tails balancing their motion as they ran. They were lean, curious, hungry, generalists. They ate what they could find, insects, ferns, small prey, and in a broken world, that flexibility was salvation. Evolution had chosen its new language, adaptability, and these creatures spoke it fluently. While others had died clinging to what they were, the dinosaurs thrived by becoming what they needed to be. They grew quickly, moved efficiently, their bones light but strong, their limbs upright beneath them, a design meant not for survival in one place, but for motion through many. The ground no longer belonged to the past. It belonged to those who could move with the earth's rhythm. And there were others too, quiet heirs to the chaos. Early ancestors of crocodilians slid through the flooded rivers, their bodies blending water and land with ease. Tiny mammalomorphs, shrew-sized, nocturnal, picked through the leaf litter at night, feeding on insects and seeds. They had survived the deluge by staying small, by staying unnoticed. Their time would come later. For now, they watched from the edges, as dinosaurs claimed the stage. The forests that rose after the flood were unlike anything the earth had seen before. Conifers spread across continents, their tall trunks reaching for a sun that had been hidden for ages. The air shimmered with humidity, and ferns carpeted every patch of ground. New rivers carved new valleys, lakes gleamed in the hollows where deserts once burned. The climate that had once destroyed was now the architect of life. Moisture, warmth, and light, the ingredients of abundance, had returned. The planet, reborn from the storm, had created a canvas for its next masterpiece. Fossil records show this rebirth clearly. A sudden surge in diversity, new footprints, new pollen, new bones scattered through soft gray stone. Species that had been rare became common. Forms that had been small grew large. Within a few million years, herbivorous dinosaurs had evolved from modest scavengers into towering browsers that could strip conifer branches bare. Predators followed, slender, agile theropods, the ancestors of both tyrannosaurs and birds, stalked the undergrowth. Every ecological niche that the flood had emptied was filled again, but this time by something faster, smarter, restless. The world had entered a new rhythm, and once it began, it would not stop for another 150 million years. From a historian's eye, this was not just evolution, it was reinvention. The Earth had learned from its mistakes, rewriting its ecosystems from the ground up. It replaced bulk with speed, stability with change, and fragility with fluidity. It was as if the planet itself had understood that survival was not strength, but motion. The story of these survivors is not one of dominance, not yet. It is a story of persistence, of creatures finding opportunity in disaster, of ecosystems rebuilding not by design, but by the simple refusal to end. It's a rhythm as old as the world: collapse, silence, renewal. Fire, water, life. The rain that once drowned the land had now given it back its breath. And in that breath, a new chorus began, a chorus that would echo for eons. The footsteps of dinosaurs, the whisper of wings, the pulse of a planet alive again. So when we look back now, when we uncover fossils with our careful hands, brush dust from bones that slept for 230 million years, we are not digging for tragedy. We are uncovering resilience. Each fossil is not a death mask, but a victory. A sign that even after 2 million years of storm, life found a way to rise, to rebuild, to begin again. And perhaps in that persistence there's a message for us, not shouted but quietly waiting, that every ending carries the seed of a beginning, and every storm, however endless it seems, exists to remind us how to start anew. So stay, walk with me through these ancient forests. There's more to see, more to learn, because the story of survival, of Earth's endless rebirth, is far from over. The storm had passed. The air, still heavy with memory, shimmered beneath a quieter sun. Across Pangaea the rivers calmed, the forests deepened, and the sound of rain was replaced by the thud of footsteps that had never been heard before. The survivors were no longer small. They were evolving, rapidly, brilliantly, into creatures that would define the next 150 million years. The dinosaurs had arrived. At first they were modest, nimble shapes darting between conifer trunks, feathered limbs glistening with dew. But evolution is swift when the world is empty. The flood had left behind open niches, new forests to feed in, new prey to chase, new air to breathe. And into that space, the dinosaurs expanded like a heartbeat, rediscovering its rhythm. The herbivores grew first. Small bipedal forms began to lengthen, their necks stretching to reach the canopy. Their digestion evolved into slow, efficient fermentation, able to turn coarse conifer needles into energy. From them would come the sauropodomorphs, the ancestors of titans yet to be born, the first creatures to dream of the sky not as a ceiling, but as a goal. They grew taller, heavier, more deliberate in motion, their lungs vast and efficient, their hearts strong enough to lift blood through necks longer than any creature before. In a few short million years, the world had its first giants. Predators followed. For every herbivore that rose, a shadow grew with it. Slender theropods, built for pursuit and precision, began to prowl the forests and plains. They were light-boned, their muscles coiled with speed, their claws sharp as volcanic glass. In their eyes burned something new, not just hunger, but intelligence. Their movements were coordinated, their senses keen. They were no longer beasts of instinct alone, but the first strategists of the Mesozoic. Some hunted in pairs, some ambushed in the mist, their roars echoing across valleys still wet from the ancient flood. Every hunt, every chase was evolution in motion. The balance had returned, but it was a new kind of balance, faster, more dynamic, a dance of adaptation and response. And the earth, for all its patience, seemed to delight in this new energy. Volcanoes cooled, mountains lifted, and air once heavy with vapor now shimmered with light. It was as if the planet itself had exhaled after holding its breath for 2 million years. The conifer forests stretched for thousands of kilometers, and in their shade, new species thrived. The rivers teemed with amphibians, the skies with dragonflies the size of hawks. Everywhere, life was experimenting again, finding new forms, new ways to exist. The age of dinosaurs had begun, not with thunder, but with a pulse, a quiet acceleration of possibility. Fossil records from this time read like a celebration of adaptation. Where before there had been scarcity, now there was abundance. The diversity of plant life exploded, conifers, ferns, cycads, each thriving in its own way. The ecosystems rebuilt themselves, layer by layer, until the earth was once again a chorus of breath and motion. The dinosaurs were no longer background characters, they had become the heartbeat. Their bones appear everywhere, in riverbeds and floodplains, preserved in the fine gray silt left by receding storms. In each print, in each fossilized trackway, there is a story of emergence. A species discovering not just survival, but dominance. To study them now is to witness success written in stone. They were not accidents, they were inevitabilities. The planet had sculpted them to fill every space left by the vanished, and once they found their rhythm, nothing could stop them. For the next 150 million years, they would rule continents, transform landscapes, and evolve into forms more astonishing than anything that Earth had ever known. Long-necked titans would stride through forests older than the first mammals. Winged reptiles would darken the skies at dusk, and deep within the shadows, small feathered hunters, ancestors of future birds, would rehearse the idea of flight. The world had traded stillness for motion and silence for song. To a historian of the Earth, this was the moment when survival became art. The dinosaurs were not simply enduring. They were thriving, diversifying, testing the limits of possibility. They turned a drowned world into a living cathedral of movement. Every roar, every thunderous step was a hymn to renewal. And the lesson they left in stone is one the earth still hums beneath our feet. That from ruin comes rhythm, from loss comes invention, and from patience, eternity. So if you've stayed with this story until now, you've already walked through fire and flood, through extinction and silence. But what comes next is the true age of wonder, an empire of scales and stars, of creatures so vast they reshape gravity itself. keep listening. Because from this moment onward, the world will never be the same again. The dinosaurs ruled their world in silence, but long after they vanished, the earth kept their voices, pressed into rock, buried beneath time, waiting for someone to listen. And millions of years later, we did. It began with fragments, a bone here, a footprint there, a ripple in stone that looked too deliberate to be chance. In the deserts of Europe, in the cliffs of China, in the dry canyons of the Americas, scientists began to uncover the pages of an ancient story. Each fossil, each layer of sediment, was a sentence written in the language of the earth, and together they told of fire, rain, and rebirth, the long arc from Wrangellia's eruptions to the dawn of the dinosaurs. The first clue came from the rocks themselves. To a trained eye, they revealed the pulse of the planet. The lower layers, red, rough sandstone, spoke of drought and dust of the old Pangaean deserts. Above them, a sudden band of black shale and coal, a mark of flooding, of swamps where deserts once stood. That black line exists on every continent. It is the scar of the Carnian pluvial episode, the 2-million-year storm. To stand before it in the field is to touch the moment when the world forgot how to be dry. The air is still. The rock is cold, and within it lies the boundary between eras. A single thin horizon separating loss from renewal. Later came the chemistry. Geologists, using the precision of atoms themselves, read the isotopic fingerprints of carbon and oxygen left behind by those ancient rains. They saw the sudden surge of volcanic gas, the drop in carbon-13, the signal of Wrangellia's outgassing. They saw the warming, the oceans thick with vapor, the atmosphere heavy with heat, and then the cooling and quiet that followed. Every change recorded, every cause mirrored in effect. The Earth had kept its own ledger. Even mercury, a trace metal released during eruptions, was found concentrated in the same black layers, a metallic memory of fire falling into water. Piece by piece, the mystery became method. And still, the fossils came, the bones of Dicynodonts fading near the boundary, the first sauropodomorphs appearing just above it. The transition so clear it could be read like music, a chord of extinction, a note of survival. Then the swelling crescendo of diversification. The song of the dinosaurs beginning to rise. In the pollen trapped in stone, the same melody repeated. Before the rain, seed ferns, arid plants, dust. After the rain, ferns, conifers, lush spores. The world itself had changed its vocabulary, and science, with its patience and curiosity, had finally learned how to translate it. When I visit dig sites, there's always a moment that feels sacred. The sun high above, the wind dry on the face. And beneath your fingertips, rock that once was river mud. You brush away the dust, and there, beneath a thin veil of time, is the shape of a rib, a tooth, a footprint. It is humbling, almost reverent, to realize that the thing you hold was once alive beneath a sky that rained for 2 million years. You can almost hear the distant thunder in the silence of the stone. The story of the Earth is not written in words. It's written in layers, each one a page of pressure and patience, and like all great stories, it repeats its themes: fire, flood, rebirth, time. Scientists across generations have added their verses to that ancient song. Michael Sims and Alastair Ruffle were the first to name the event the Carnian pluvial episode, linking the black layers across continents into one vast narrative. Later geochemists traced the isotopes, paleontologists the fossils, palynologists the pollen. Each field, a different instrument, each discovery, another note in harmony. Together they resurrected a world that had been gone for 230 million years. When I think of it now, I see more than data. I see devotion. A lineage of minds stretching across centuries, each bending close to the earth to hear what it remembers. Because science, at its heart, is not cold. It is the act of listening, of love in the language of precision. Every fossil dug, every isotope measured is a gesture of reverence, a way of asking the earth, tell us what happened and how you survived. And in the quiet of the lab, when the samples rest under the microscope's light, I sometimes imagine that the planet is speaking back, not in words but in patience. Its message is simple, enduring. Everything you are standing on has died before, and everything you see will one day be stone. The Earth keeps no secrets. It only waits for us to notice. So as we trace these memories through rock and dust, as we build stories from fractures and fossils, we are not just studying extinction. We are remembering resilience. Every storm, every scar, every vanished creature led, inevitably, beautifully to us. And perhaps that is why we keep digging, not only to understand what came before, but to recognize ourselves in the persistence of the world beneath our feet. The fossils are not just echoes of the past. They are blueprints for endurance. Reminders that even when the sky falls, life waits to rise again. So if you've ever stood before a cliff of layered stone and felt a strange stillness in your chest, as if the rock itself were breathing, then you've heard it too. That faint, ageless rhythm, that quiet pulse beneath time, the Earth's way of saying, I remember, Behem. There is something almost sacred in the way a scientist bends down to touch the Earth. Not as a conqueror, not as a miner seeking wealth, but as a listener. Someone trying to understand what the planet has been whispering for hundreds of millions of years. Every fossil, every mineral vein, every layer of dust that settles upon another is a fragment of a sentence, and together they form the autobiography of the Earth itself. When the first geologists began to read this book, they didn't yet know it had chapters. They thought the world was young, that the mountains had always stood where they were, that seas had never changed their beds. But stone is patient, and it speaks only to those who stay long enough to hear. Over centuries, one discovery at a time, we began to realize that the planet was not static. It was alive in its own vast tempo. Mountains rose and fell like breaths. Continents drifted like slow ships through fire. And life, from trilobite to tyrannosaur to us, was just one more note in that endless song of motion. Science did not invent this story, it translated it. In the 19th century, as miners dug deep into coal beds, they found the pressed shadows of ferns from the world drowned by ancient rain. Each leaf preserved with veins so delicate they looked almost new. These were the ghosts of the Carnian flood, the silent witnesses to the storm that rewrote the map of life. And through them we began to see not myth, but memory, the planet's own record of its trials and recoveries. Later, in the quiet rooms of universities, microscopes turned toward the dust of those ferns, toward the pollen sealed in rock for 230 million years. And in that pollen, we found evidence of change, the shift from dry world plants to wet world forests. The Earth had kept its diary, and science had finally learned the language. But this wasn't just geology, it was empathy in motion, a form of reverence disguised as data. When we study the layers of the Earth, we are not just measuring time, we are witnessing endurance, the ability of a planet to break, to heal, and to keep creating despite everything. To trace the fingerprints of Wrangellia's eruptions, to map the scars of the rain, is to realize that even destruction can be beautiful when it leads to renewal. The instruments changed, but the purpose never did. From hand-drawn field sketches to laser spectrometers and satellite imaging, our eyes have only grown sharper. But the truth remains the same. The Earth has been trying to tell us its story, and we are only now beginning to understand its tone. Each crater, each fossil bed, each isotopic shift is a phrase in that conversation. A reminder that we live not above the planet, but within it, woven into its memory like a final, fragile stanza. And sometimes, the story feels almost personal. In the desert heat of Arizona, you can stand among the red cliffs where the storm once began. If you scrape the dust aside, you'll find the black band, the same layer of shale that lies beneath Italy, China, and Argentina. One thin horizon, linking every continent like a scar that never healed. It is humbling to stand there, to touch that ancient seam and feel the echo of 2 million years of rain. You can almost hear the earth breathe beneath your hand. Science, in its truest form, is not the opposite of wonder. It is wonder, trained into patience. It is the bridge between curiosity and truth, between what we imagine and what the world quietly remembers. When geochemists read the carbon isotopes, when paleontologists trace bones through mudstone, when climatologists model the storms of the Triassic, they are not just studying history, They are listening for continuity. The earth still sings the same melody, only now we have the instruments to hear it. There is something deeply human about that pursuit. To gather fragments from across continents, to align them into a story that stretches beyond imagination, it is an act of faith as much as intellect. It means believing that the universe keeps records, that even chaos leaves fingerprints, and that meaning survives in the smallest grain of sand. That is the secret gift of science. It doesn't just answer questions, it teaches us how to ask better ones, adapts to change. When you hold a fossil in your hand, you are not holding the past, you are holding persistence. You are touching proof that life endures catastrophe, adapts to change, and keeps moving forward. And perhaps, in this quiet century of our own storms, that is what we need to remember most. The planet is not fragile, it is responsive. It mirrors what we give it, and it always answers, sometimes in whispers, sometimes in floods. We have learned to read its history. Now we must learn to honor it. Because every fossil we uncover, every storm we model, every question we ask, is part of the same dialogue. The one that began when the first scientist brushed dust from stone and heard thunder in silence. The story continues. And if you've been walking with me through these epochs, then you already know, it's not just a story about the Earth, it's about us. We are its latest layer, its newest memory, and one day, our footprints too will turn to stone. At last, the sky grew tired. The clouds that had ruled the earth for 2 million years began to fade, their bellies empty, their thunder hollow. The last rains fell softly, a whisper, not a roar, and the planet exhaled. After centuries of gray, the first sunlight broke through. It shone not on deserts, but on a world transformed, a green, breathing continent reborn from flood and fire. The rivers slowed, the oceans calmed, and the land, waterlogged and fertile, began to remember how to be still. It was no longer the Pangaea that had once existed. The flood had carved new channels, split valleys open, and left vast plains of dark, rich soil. Forests stretched where there had once been sand. Swamps shimmered under a golden haze. Every horizon was a mirror of green and light. The earth had remade itself. In that silence after the storm, the survivors thrived. The dinosaurs, once minor shadows among giants, rose to fill the emptiness. Their bones grew larger, their steps heavier, their voices deeper. The first herds gathered, herbivores grazing under the conifers, their tails swaying like pendulums. Predators followed, learning the patterns of new prey, their eyes sharp with hunger and intelligence. For the first time since the flood, balance returned. Not the same as before, but something newer, something wiser. The world had learned what it could endure. Fossils from this age show not chaos, but rhythm. The lines of sediment are even, their colors gentle gradients of brown and green, the signature of stability. The earth was breathing in long, slow cycles again. The great fever had passed. And yet, in its stones, you can still feel the echo of the rain. The faint shimmer of moisture trapped in ancient mud, a memory that never quite dried. Because no planet forgets its storms, they are part of its design. The oceans, once choked with sediment, began to clear. Reefs grew back, small at first, then vast and luminous. Marine life flourished, ammonites spiraling through the currents, fish weaving through coral that glittered like glass. The air, now rich with oxygen, fed fires and forests alike. The carbon once locked in magma and storm was now sealed again, trapped in the bodies of trees and beasts, hidden in the soil. It was as if the planet, having suffered a fever, had found its equilibrium once more. To a historian of worlds, this is the moment that feels most human. The calm after destruction, the fragile peace after unthinkable change. For millions of years, the earth had lived in violence, ripped apart, drowned, scorched, remade. Now it rested, and in that rest, it dreamed. Those dreams took shape as life itself. Every fern that opened, every egg that hatched, was a small continuation of that dream. A quiet vow that life would not fade again so easily. The Triassic world was over. The Jurassic had begun. Across time, scientists would later name this boundary, trace it in rock, and realize it marked more than a change in species. It was the moment the Earth turned a page, from survival to creativity. Where once nature fought merely to endure, it now began to build. Ecosystems became complex, interdependent. Forests grew taller, rivers more permanent, climates more stable. The world was no longer recovering, it was thriving. Standing in that renewed landscape, if one could have, you'd see the air glowing faintly with humidity, ferns glistening with dew, and distant herds moving like waves across the horizon. Above them, the sky would be vast and clear, only streaked by high clouds, a quiet reminder of the storms that had once ruled all things. The rain had ended, but its mark remained in everything alive. Every living being was a child of that flood, carrying its memory in bone, in breath, in blood. Even now, that memory flows within us, the minerals in our bodies, the water in our veins, all once part of that same ancient deluge. The rain taught the earth humility. It taught life to bend, not break. And in that surrender, creation found its permanence. Because every storm, no matter how long, eventually ends. But its echo becomes part of the song forever. And maybe that's why we're drawn to stories of disaster and rebirth, to tempests and dawns. Somewhere deep inside, our species remembers that we, too, are the children of a world that survived its own drowning. So as sunlight returned to the Triassic skies and the first forests of the Jurassic swayed in the wind, the planet entered its golden age, the long empire of dinosaurs, the reign of forests, the calm heartbeat of an Earth that had endured everything and still chosen life. If you've listened this far, then you've walked through that storm with me, through the fire, through the flood, through the silence and the song that followed. Stay close. There's one more thing the Earth still wants to show us. When the skies finally cleared, the world was quiet again. But it was not the same world that had existed before. The Earth had shed its skin. Its deserts had turned to forests, its beasts to bones, its silence to song. And in the green stillness that followed the storm, the law of life was rewritten. It was no longer the strongest who survived, but the most adaptable. Before the flood, the rulers of the dry world had been specialists, creatures of precision, perfectly tuned to the narrow rhythm of drought and heat. They were strong, yes, but their strength was brittle. They knew only one way to live, and when the rules changed, their perfection became a prison. The Dicynodonts, the Postosuchus, the Rhynchosaurs, each of them a masterpiece of evolution, fell to the same truth, that survival does not belong to those who dominate, but to those who can change. The dinosaurs, those once small, uncertain wanderers, were not built to rule. They were built to adjust. Light bones, quick reflexes, generalist diets, their simplicity became their advantage. Where others had a single path, they had many. When the storm came, they bent with the wind, and when it passed, they were still standing. That is how evolution moves, not with fairness, but with flexibility. Every great extinction has its chosen survivors, not chosen by fate, but by adaptability. The flood didn't just erase species, it tested possibilities. It asked the planet, "Who among you can begin again?" And life answered. With ferns that grew faster, with roots that breathed underwater, with lungs that could draw air from heavy skies, with creatures that could live both on land and in the shallows, that could hunt in the dark and rest through fire. The survivors were not the proud, but the patient. Not the invincible, but the inventive. That lesson has never stopped echoing. Every shift since, from ice to fire, from meteor to man, has repeated it. Over and over, the earth whispers, "Change or be left behind." For billions of years, that whisper shaped everything, from the curve of a leaf to the arc of a wing. It's the same voice that turned the flood into forests, the same rhythm that now hums inside our blood. We, too, are children of adaptation. Our hands, our breath, our minds, each shaped by the need to endure and evolve. And yet, as we look around today, we often forget how fragile success is. We build civilizations with the confidence of dinosaurs at their height, believing our knowledge can outlast the planet's rhythm. But history and stone tell another story. Every species that thought itself eternal has learned humility the hard way. Every empire carved into the world has eventually melted back into the dust it stood on. The pattern never breaks. The cycle never ends. Adaptation is not a gift, it's a responsibility. It is the test. If the flood of the Carnian taught the Earth anything, it was this. Catastrophe is not the end, it is the test. The rain didn't come to punish, it came to clear space, to make room for something new, and what rose after it was stronger, quicker, wiser. It was life stripped of arrogance, reforged by pressure, ready to begin again. So when we look at the fossil record, we are not seeing tragedy, we are seeing graduation. The Earth advancing through the curriculum of time, one extinction at a time. In that way, evolution is not about power at all, it's about grace. The grace to let go of what no longer works, the courage to become something unfamiliar. A fern that learns to breathe under floodwater, a reptile that learns to fly, a mammal that learns to think. Adaptation is faith in the unfinished. It's the Earth's way of saying, you're not done yet. If you listen closely to the fossils, to the rocks and the ash and the layers between, you can still hear that voice. It hums softly beneath our feet, in the wind that crosses oceans, in the pulse of the rain we still call ordinary. It says, the world you know is temporary, but life is permanent in its willingness to change. And perhaps that is the oldest wisdom of all. So, as the Triassic world dried its tears, and the Jurassic dawned bright and green, the cycle began again. Life building, expanding, waiting quietly for its next challenge. Because evolution never ends. It only pauses and listens for the next storm. And somewhere deep in the stone, the Earth still keeps the memory of that lesson, etched in silence, waiting for us to remember it too. The story of the 2-million-year reign is not a tragedy. It is a memory, a reminder that this planet, our silent blue cradle, has always known how to begin again. When the sky broke open, when the mountains dissolved, when the old world drowned beneath its own breath, the Earth did not end. It transformed, and every drop of that endless storm was a sentence in a larger truth. Life is not fragile. It is persistent. From the fire of Rangelia, to the flood that followed, to the quiet rise of dinosaurs beneath new forests, the planet showed what it has always been capable of. Rebirth through ruin. Each extinction was an erasure, yes, but also an invitation. Each silence was not emptiness, but preparation. The Earth has never stopped writing its story. We are simply living in its newest chapter. Imagine for a moment the sound of the world just after the storm. No thunder, no wind, just the soft dripping of rain from conifer leaves. The ground black with moisture, the air trembling with warmth, and beneath it all the faint heartbeat of a planet exhaling in relief. From that breath, forests grew, rivers found their paths, life began again, quietly, fearlessly. That same rhythm still moves through us now. It's in our lungs, our oceans, our seasons. The same water that carved Pangaea's valleys now falls as rain against your window. The same carbon that filled the ancient air flows through every cell that keeps you alive. We are the continuation of that storm. We are its echo, its consequence, its redemption. And yet, for all our knowledge, we still make the same mistake the giants once did. We believe ourselves invincible. We build walls against time, we pave the rivers, we quiet the forests. But the Earth does not bend to will, it moves to balance, always. The same laws that once turned deserts to seas and beasts to fossils still hum beneath our feet. And when the balance tips again, as it always will, the Earth will remember what to do. It will cleanse, it will reshape, it will begin anew. But here is the difference now. For the first time, the planet has a species that can choose how to respond. We have read its record, decoded its scars, heard its voice in the stone. We know what happens when imbalance lingers too long. We know how quickly the rain can return. And that knowledge, that awareness, is the gift of our age. It's the reason we tell these stories, the reason we dig and question and look to the stars for meaning. Because every fossil, every layer, every vanished world is not just a warning. It's an invitation to do better. As I finish this story, I picture the world as it must have looked then. The last drops of the ancient rain glinting on fern leaves, the first light of a calmer sun stretching across a horizon still steaming from creation. It is the same light that touches your face now, The same warmth, the same breath of a planet that never truly stopped becoming. We are its witnesses. We are its continuation. And perhaps its final test. If you close your eyes now, you can almost hear it. The slow hum beneath the silence, the quiet promise carried through every age. I have ended before, I have begun again, and I will keep beginning until even time forgets its name. That is the voice of the earth, not pleading, not warning, simply remembering. And now that we remember too, the question is no longer what happened then, but what happens next. Because the story isn't over, it's only paused, waiting for our next move.